Teacher: Jack, why were you late for school this morning? Jack: as soon as I took one step forward, I immediately slid 2 steps back. Teacher: in that case, you would never have ended up here. Jack: oh, I turned around backwards and went in the opposite direction. Teacher: you know that bodies expand when they are heated, and when they cool, they contract. Who can give me an example of this rule? Student: well, in summer the days get longer and in winter they get shorter. This afternoon we are to cut Mrs. Frog apart and see what makes her quack, said the zoology professor, addressing the class. I have just the frog in my pocket, which is what we will use for the experiment. He slipped his hand into his pocket and took out a paper bag, the contents of which he dumped on the table. A crumpled sandwich fell out of the bag. The professor furrowed his eyebrows. Oh dear, he exclaimed. I distinctly remember eating my second breakfast. Teacher: can you give me an example of a waste of energy? Willie: of course, madam. Telling a scary story that should make your hair stand on end to a completely bald man. That was their first date, and as they were saying goodbye, standing outside her door, the sailor asked, what would you do if I tried to kiss you? I'd call my brother right away, the girl said. And how old is he? 3, she whispered. Blushing with embarrassment, the young woman handed the telegraph operator a telegram that included her name, address, and a single word, yes. Wishing to be helpful, the clerk said, you know, you can send 5 more words at the same rate. I know I can, replied the woman, but don't you think how I'll look burning to repeat what I've said 6 times? A city boy was having a conversation with a farm boy. At this time, a girl of indescribable beauty walked by, with modeling hair, a painted face, lips covered in bright lipstick, and a stunning manicure on her nails. Well, what do you say about that? Asked the city boy. I'll say, as a farmer, replied the villager on reflection, it gave me the impression of a rather poor soil, requiring a lot of fertilizer. Boy: I'm sorry, but, girl. No, you've never met me at a Sunday school picnic or dance or soccer game. I don't know your cousin from Kalamazoo, and I'm nothing like the girl you met in Paducah. I don't have to go that way, and I wasn't going to ride with you on a bet. I never went to the same school as you. I'm not waiting for the bus, and I'm going on a date with my boyfriend who weighs 90 pounds. By the way, were you going to say something? Boy: yes, I was going to say that your skirt is ripped in the back. A father, helping his son do his homework, is indignant. You don't know the multiplication table. The son reaches for his cell phone. Now he's going to tell me why I need to know it when I have a calculator, the father thinks. The boy opens the voice search. Multiplication table, what is it? Dad: why is the moon bigger than the stars? I don't know. Why is the sun so bright? I don't know. Dad: maybe you're tired. No, you ask me, son. Who else but your father can explain everything to you? Sunday was the last day before Joe got married, and he decided to spend it with his father at a restaurant. Raising his glass and offering a drink to his father's health, Joe asked, what do you wish for me, Father, on the eve of my wedding, this crucial step in my life? 2 things, son. 1. Instill in your wife from the start that you should spend 1 evening a week with your friends. Fair enough, but what's the second thing? 2. Don't waste it on your friends. A Jewish family returns from the suburbs to New York City. The father stops a cab. How much is the fare to downtown New York? You and your wife owe me $20 each. And I'll give the kids a free ride. Yasha, Leva, Sarah, Celia, get in the car, and my mother and I will walk. A girl was applying for a job as a stenographer and had to take a spelling test. How would you spell Mississippi? She was asked. She thought for a moment and then said, river or state? A beautiful young lady presented a check at the bank window to get cash. The clerk quickly checked the check and asked, can you individuate yourself? The young woman then opened her purse, took out a mirror, and after looking into it for a couple of seconds, looked at the clerk and said, yes, that's me, don't worry. While reviewing the job applications for correctness of completion, the personnel officer saw one in which he read father's age 120. Mother's age 112. The personnel officer invited the person who had filled out this application and asked with surprise, but your parents can't be that old, can they? Of course not, the man replied. But they could be, if they were alive. The chief walked into the warehouse and froze. He saw a kid leaning against a package and blatantly idling. This was an unheard of insolence at his enterprise. "How much do you get a week?" the chief asked menacingly. $120. Here's your $120. Now get out of here. You're fired." After the kid had philosophically tucked the money in his pocket and departed, the boss turned to the foreman and demanded, "Since when has this bum been working for us?" "Never, as far as I know," was the reply. "He's just dropping off a package for us." A good fairy appeared to a 60-year-old couple on their 40th wedding anniversary. She said that since they were so devoted to each other, she would fulfill one of their most cherished wishes. The wife wished to go on a trip around the world. VJIK. In the same second, the cruise tickets were in her hands. The husband wished for a woman 30 years younger than him. VJIK. In the same second, he turned into a 90-year-old man. An old lady came into an American bank with a bag full of money. She told the clerk that she wanted to open an account at their bank for a very large sum of money. But first she wanted to talk to the president of the bank. She was escorted to the president's office. He asked her, "How much money, madam, do you wish to open an account for?" "For the sum of $300,000, replied madam. The president looked at her with surprise and asked, "How did you manage to accumulate so much money?" "Very simply," she replied. "I make a bet, and do you always win?" "Always. You want to bet 25,000 that you have square balls?" "But that's not true." "All the more reason. Let's bet. But to be fair, I'll be here tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. with my lawyer. Agreed?" The president agreed, looking forward to pocketing 25,000 for nothing. The next day at 10 a.m. sharp, the woman and her lawyer arrived at the president's office. "Well," she said, "show me your evidence. Take off your clothes and show me your balls." The president undressed. The woman then asked, "Can I see for myself?" "Please," the president replied. The old lady came over, took his balls in her hands, and said, "Yes, you were right. Eggs are not square." And she turned to her lawyer. "Will you testify to the fact, please?" The lawyer, seeing this scene, began to bang his head against the wall. The astonished president asked, "What's wrong with him?" "Yes, nothing. I just bet him 50,000 that at 10 a.m. today I'd have the president of the American bank by the balls." Two judges were arrested for speeding. When they arrived at the court by summons, none of the judges were there at the time. So they decided to prepare to hear their own cases. The first judge sat on the bench and said, "You are charged with speeding." "How do you plead?" "Guilty," replied the second. "You are sentenced to pay a $50 fine." Then they switched places and the first one pleaded guilty as well. "Come," said the other judge, "cases like this are becoming more and more frequent. This is the second case since this morning. I demand a $100 fine or 10 days in jail." "Marty, you heard Bob got kicked out of school for cheating." "Wade, how did that happen?" "Marty, he got caught counting his ribs on a biology exam." The two have just come out of the movie theater, and obviously the picture was so-so, which is evident on the faces of both of them. One turns to the other and says, "You know, Frank, it's amazing what movies have progressed to in the last few years." "Well, how so?" "Well, first, there were silent movies, then there were talking movies, and today's one has a smell." "Fred, my uncle has the world's laziest rooster living on his farm." "Bill, how do you know?" "Fred, he never crow at dawn." And, after waiting for the other roosters to crow, he nods his head in agreement. The captain turned to the young recruit. "Did you wash the bridge?" "Yes, sir." "Have you polished all the copper?" "Yes, sir." "Have you waxed the floors?" "Yes, sir. I even wiped the horizon with a telescope." Conscript. "Isn't the captain the biggest jerk you've ever seen?" Young beauty. "And do you know who I am?" "I'm the captain's daughter." Conscript. "Do you know who I am?" Young beauty. "No." Conscript. "And thank God." When the colonel entered the drawing room to take up his smoking pipe, he found his daughter sitting on the lap of the lieutenant she loved. The young officer immediately proved that he was as clever as he was handsome. Gently placing his beloved on her feet, he stood up, saluted the colonel, and announced, "Sir, I have the honor to report to you a skirmish in the vicinity of nearby headquarters, from which I emerged victorious." It only remains for you to give your sanction to the final terms of surrender." To this the colonel replied, "Negotiate, young man, negotiate. How did it happen that you got into the army?" "Well, first, I wanted to fight. Second, I thought the army would give me physical conditioning. Well, then they came and took me away." A nurse in the hospital corridor noticed a patient making circles near the men's room. The man could not get in because the toilet was occupied. Showing sensitivity, she said to the patient, "I see you are in a great difficulty. I suggest you use the women's restroom." "Can I?" "No, not really, but as an exception, you can, especially since it's free now. Just keep in mind, while you're in there, don't touch any of the 3 red buttons, okay?" The man agreed and went into the ladies' room. As he finished his business, he noticed the red buttons on the wall labeled TV, SBI, and ATV. "I wonder," he thought, "what will happen if I press one of them? Especially since no one is around." He decided and reached for the red button labeled TV. He immediately felt a stream of warm water wash over his ass. "That's it, let me try the SBI button." An air jet filled the stall with a wonderful aroma and quickly dried his wet ass. "Wow, we don't have that in our toilets. Let me touch the 3rd button." He pressed the button labeled ATV and almost instantly lost consciousness. When he woke up, he found himself lying in his hospital bed. The nurse from earlier was sitting beside him. "What happened to me? What happened to me?" the patient asked her in a low voice. "I warned you not to touch the red buttons. The first, TV, turns on warm water. The second, SBI, air dehumidifier and freshener. The third, ATV, automatic tampon extractor. But you didn't listen to me, and this is the result. Your penis is under the pillow." Fire in a hospital. After the fire has been extinguished, the firefighters report to the chief medical officer. The fire is out. 3 victims were found in the basement. 2 of them were pumped out, the 3rd one failed. The doctor falls into a deep faint. Nasamphetamine to bring him back to consciousness. "Men, we have a morgue in the basement." One day a certain blind man decided to take a vacation in Texas. In the airplane next to him sat a native Texan. Having learned that the companion had never been to his home state before, he assured his neighbor that everything was the greatest in Texas. So, by the time he landed, the blind man was in anticipation of what awaited him here. He was brought to a huge resort hotel. After checking in, before going up to his assigned room, the guest decided to go to a local bar, have a little snack and some beer. The waitress brought him such a huge mug that he couldn't help but remark, "I see Texas really is the biggest place in the world." "Yes, it is," she agreed. After he had finished the giant sandwich and washed it down with an unimaginable mug of beer, he naturally felt the need to go to the bathroom. He asked the same waitress how to get there, and she explained how after passing the front desk, he should turn left, and the second door on the right would be the entrance to the restroom. The blind man thanked her, passed the reception desk, turned left, but after passing the first and second doors, he reached the third. Pushing it open, without realizing it, he found himself in a huge swimming pool. The poor man took a few steps, tripped and fell into the pool. When he came to the surface and remembered everything he had been told about Texas, he screamed, "For God's sake, don't flush me." A cowboy and a madam meet. "Oh, cowboy, what a big hat you have." "Madam, it's not a hat, it's a sombrero. Besides, I'm from Texas, and Texans have big things. What a big gun you have." "Madam, it's not a gun, it's a Colt. And how very thoughtful of you. I'm from Texas, and Texans, ma'am, everything is big." Madam is tempted. After a while, shaking off her skirt, she said, "And you also said from Texas's." Cowboy. "Madam, I'm sorry, but I didn't know you were from Texas, too." An elderly American man dreamed of taking to the air in a sports airplane. Every year he and his wife came to the airfield and tried to negotiate a price with the pilot. He called the same amount of $200. The American's wife could not hear of spending such money. Every time she discouraged her husband, $200 is $200. This time, when he arrived at the flying field, he again tried to persuade his wife to give him a chance to fly, referring to his advanced age as the last chance. His wife, as always, kept saying, $200 is $200. A pilot who heard the conversation made a suggestion. "Listen, I'll give you both a free ride, but on one condition. No matter what happens in the air, you don't say a word." Otherwise, you pay me $200. Agreed? The couple quickly agreed, got on the plane and flew. The pilot was very surprised that during the flight there was not a sound from behind. He was doing all sorts of things. He rocked the airplane and made the most terrible aerobatics figures, without a word from the passenger cabin. When he finally landed and turned around, he asked the old man, "Did you never once during the whole flight feel like saying anything?" "Of course," he replied, "I wanted to tell you that my wife fell out of the plane, but, you know, $200 is $200. A blonde has an economy class airplane ticket and sits in business class. Everyone takes turns trying to get her to sit down. She won't budge. Finally the chief pilot joins in. "I'll talk to her. I can do it. My wife is blonde too." He whispered something in her ear. The blonde immediately got up and went to her seat. "Everybody. What did you say to her?" "I told her business class doesn't fly to Miami." During the Sunday service, the padre addressed his congregation. "How many of you have forgiven your enemies?" 3/4 of the congregation raised their hands. The priest repeated the question again. This time all but one elderly lady raised her hands. "Mrs. Nellie," said the padre, "do you not seek to forgive your enemies?" "I have none," she replied, smiling sweetly. "Miss Nellie, this is so unusual. Pardon my indelicacy, but how old are you?" "I'm sorry, I'm 98 years old." "In that case, would you be so kind as to come over here and explain to everyone how a man can live for 98 years without making a single enemy?" "Miss Nellie," the old woman approached the Holy Father, and, turning to the congregation, said, "And I have outlived them all." A woman came to a priest and addressed him saying, "Father, I have a big problem with my girl parrots. Whoever comes into the house, they start screaming at the top of their lungs, 'We're whores.' Do you want a treat?" "Yes," the father shook his head, "that's a problem. But you know, I think there's a way out of it. I have a couple of boy parrots at home who are always going through the rosary and praying. Let's put your birds with mine, and they will teach your birds to pray." The woman gladly accepted the offer and brought her birds to the priest's house. But as soon as they were in the cage, they immediately cried out, "We are whores. Do you want a treat?" One of the boy parrots just froze in amazement. But the other one immediately found himself. "Hey, buddy, drop your rosary beads. Finally our prayers have been answered." In a supermarket, a man with a cart full of food is heading for the checkout. The manageress, the one who runs around the hall after serious shoppers and offers her help. "Man, is this everything? Didn't forget anything?" "Man. Yes, I think I need some toilet paper too." "How much?" "Man." Nodding at the cart. "Well, you figure it out." A man in a supermarket noticed an attractive woman who waved at him. She then said to him, "Hello." Oh, standing in front of him was an attractive brown woman with long hair and green eyes. He was just taken aback because he couldn't remember where he had seen her. So he asked, "Do you know me?" To which she answers him, "Yes. You're the father of one of my children." Now he mentally traveled back to the one time he cheated on his wife. "My God, are you the stripper from my bachelor party with whom I made love on the pool table while all my buddies watched your partner whip me with raw celery?" She looks at him with surprised eyes and says calmly, "No, I'm your son's teacher." Two alcoholics come to a supermarket to buy food. One went for a drink, the other for a snack. He comes to the cheese and says, "I'll have 200 grams. Of this, what's it called?" And yells at the whole store, "Sonia, what dick did you call me yesterday?" Dutch. The director of a large supermarket calls his secretary from vacation. "Well, how's my favorite ficus?" "It's gone." What happened?" "The fireman hit it with a hose and trampled it." "You're always like this. You could have prepared me somehow. I'm on vacation." "I'd say it's been a hard week. The ficus wasn't watered enough, so it." "And you, without preparation." "And how's our supermarket?" "It's been a hard week, it's been underwater." Hearing the doorbell, the homeowner hurriedly opened the front door and discovered an old friend and a large dog beside him. Come in," he greeted the guest cheerfully. The friend entered the house and sat down, while the dog chased the master's cat, knocked over a table lamp and several vases, finally settling down in the best chair. As the guest got ready to leave, the host said with sarcasm in his voice, "Try not to forget your dog? Dog?" "I don't have any dog," replied the guest. "I thought it was your dog." "I'm not overly impressed," declared the old hunter, by stories of people hitting their prey from 300 to 400 yards away. "One day, I was walking along a forest trail when my eagle eyes spotted a marvelous deer. I loaded my rifle with a cartridge into which I had put a couple ounces of salt in addition to gunpowder. Then I took aim, fired, and my deer fell to the ground." "That's very interesting," remarked his interlocutor. "But why should it have been necessary to add salt to the charge?" "Because, my friend, the deer was very far away, and I had to do something to keep the meat from getting rotten before I could get to it." A businessman traveling north asked the clerk at the hotel what the weather was expected to be like tomorrow. The clerk shook his head. As luck would have it, an Indian who also worked here entered the hotel at that moment. Hearing the conversation, he immediately replied, "It will rain heavily," and so it turned out to be. The next day the businessman decided to test the Indian's extraordinary abilities once again. This time, he predicted clear and cool weather. And again the forecast was completely justified. When on the third day the Indian was asked to predict the weather, he smiled and said, "Didn't you listen to the radio today?"